welcome to episode 138 of the CRICKETher Weekly. First up, we are continuing the discussion of regional news, which was a main talking point of last week's episode because two more regions have announced their contracts list. First of all, the Vipers, who we did talk a little bit about last week. Sid, you were, we collectively were perhaps a little bit concerned, but they have now announced their contracts list, and included in that, obviously, Lindsay Smith, who we talked about last week, has made the move back down south to her original Kia Super League stomping ground, but also Ella McCacken has got her first contract, age 20, young opening batter. And Emily Winder has signed her first ever professional contract with the Vipers. Great news for them because she's obviously been really crucial in some of those key moments. And they've also announced this kind of sort of winter list of people who are on, I can't remember how they've labelled them, retainer contracts
over the winter.
So they don't have professional contracts, but they're almost like kind of training together for the coaches, I guess, to get to see how they respond to that environment. And in particular, there's two young wicket-keepers who are going to be fighting it out for the wicket-keeping gig, aren't there, Sid?
Yeah, so the wicket-keeping role is an interesting one at Vipers. Obviously, Carla Rudd is kind of, drawing towards the end of her career. She's never wanted a professional contract because, she's got a decent job. She's a teacher and she's head of sport at a school in Cambridge these days, I believe. Mm-hmm. And as she approaches her mid-30s kind of thing, then obviously they're looking for new options. So, Rihanna Southby is making the trip down to the south coast. Someone has been at Surrey her entire career, ever since her youth. A very, very competitive cricketer, very up and in your face. So she's going to be kind of
we mean that in a good way.
pitching herself for that gig.
Yeah.
And as is Chloe Hill.
Yeah.
So Chloe Hill has come, and Chloe Hill will be a Vipers player next year. So she's kind of signed on, but obviously she's also chasing that kind of wicket keeping role over the longer term.
Yeah. She's moved from Sparks.
It's going to be interesting to see who will get those, and it is kind of an interesting approach that the Vipers have taken. So what they've done, rather than a couple of other counties like Yorkshire and the South East Stars have gone, well, we're going to give all our contracts up front. We'll fund the extra bits because the ECB aren't funding all of the contracts until the spring.
Yeah.
But some of the counties have gone well, or some of the regions have gone well. We'll fund them from the go, which is essentially being funded by their parent men's counties, because that's where the money ultimately is coming from. But what the Vipers have done is gone, well, no, we'll take the base level of contracts here, but we'll have these retainer contracts over the winter, and people can battle it out. It's almost like I'm a cricketer, get me out of here, or get me into here.
You get me into here, I think it's.
So there'll be the people on those retainer contracts of kind of Lottie's set them a challenge really. They've gone come down and prove to us you're good enough, and you could be part of the Vipers squad next year.
In the red corner we have Rihanna Southby, in the blue corner we have Chloe Hill. I think it's really interesting, and I've got to say that in the space of kind of a few months, Charlotte Edwards has done more succession planning for the Vipers team than the ECB have done for the England team in about 5 years. Actually thinking about who is going to be my next wicketkeeper, who is going to be the core of the Vipers team,
and who is going to be the next England assistant coach.
Yeah. Well, that was my handy link in to talking about the fact that they have recontracted.
Anya Shrubsole has been given a playing contract for 2 years.
Yeah.
Is she going to actually play much cricket? Well, maybe or maybe not. I mean, she's certainly expected to play some, and I know that for certain that she's hoping to play in the 100 next year. But obviously the playing contracts are where the money is. The ECB allocate money for the playing contracts. There's not as much money allocated for an assistant coaching role. So what that does is allows the Vipers to kind of hang on to Anya, and I suspect that most of what she does in the next 2 years will be acting as Lottie's assistant coach rather than really as a player. The focus of her role is going to be assistant coach, and I think that there's a good chance that we see her moving on to become assistant coach of England when Charlotte Edwards becomes England coach in a couple of years' time.
And quite right too, because she is obviously such a brilliant, astute tactician, and Lottie is on record as saying that I think that she's one of the best coaches in the country. So they want to get her nailed down to keep doing it for Vipers. So good for them.
Now, what about Western Storm, Raf?
Yes.
What have you got to say about Western Storm?
Well, they're the other region who have announced their full contract list this week. One big piece of news is that Georgia Hennessy has been let go. I think that the official line on that is she's stepped away from cricket to pursue other opportunities. So we don't know whether she was in conversation with any other regions in terms of trying to get a contract elsewhere, but she has now departed cricket. She isn't going to be signing for another region who hasn't yet announced their contracts. She's had a couple of years of being a professional and, perhaps has decided it's not for her. I don't know exactly the ins and outs of the situation, but what I would say is that when the regional system kind of started going professional a couple of years ago and was sort of set up with that intention, we always knew that there would be players who perhaps weren't necessarily suited to professional cricket, like in terms of their own perspective, wouldn't necessarily enjoy it. In a way, they were going from being the best player in a small pond to now being one amongst many very good players in a much bigger pond, and that's kind of a difficult transition to make. And professionalism and having to train and really having to have your nose to the grindstone all the time,
having to make this your full focus.
Yeah.
It's not your hobby anymore. It's suddenly it's your job.
It's a tricky transition.
And it's not for everyone.
Yeah, so best of luck to her and whatever she wants to do in the future. Other than that, they haven't really massively shaken things up. They're now the only region to have a list of contracted players who are entirely homegrown.
Okay.
And that did apply to Thunder until recently, but they've now got Tara Norris on their list. So that's quite an interesting one for the Storm. I suppose you could say it reflects positively on their setup and the way that they've got kind of people coming up through the age group system and then retaining that loyalty to the region.
I know that the people at Storm feel that one of the big contributions that they are making is that they're putting a lot of effort into their kind of age group system and they're kind of the next tiers down. So
it's about making the setup sustainable over the longer term, isn't it?
Definitely.
Amongst those signings or people with new contracts, Sophia Smale, who's obviously had a bit of a meteoric rise. I would suggest that more people need to go on a Naughty Child podcast who people haven't really heard of and do an interview, because then you'll have like the best 6 months of your career and you'll have a brilliant time in the 100 and then end up signing your first pro contract. So yeah, Richard and Polly are obviously some kind of lucky charm, but no, she's Sophia Smale. She's obviously really earned this contract, really earned this opportunity, and I think it's brilliant for her. So yeah, great for her.
Yeah, and of course there's one other region that we still haven't heard from, Raf. What in the blazes is going on in the East Midlands?
It's really, really bad even for you, Sid. So, yes, the Lightning have become the Blaze. In case anyone didn't understand, that was what Sid was alluding to. Yes. So, yes, Lightning has struck in the East Midlands and it starts to fire. It starts to blaze would be an alternative way of putting it. It's a very interesting one. They have announced this rebrand. They haven't really. Not that I've seen. They haven't given any details about how the name was conceived. How was it chosen? What else was on the shortlist? Who got the final say? Did they ask the players?
They did ask the players.
They did ask the players.
Were involved.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Discussion. So
that's interesting. It's just always these new names, these new brands. It's like that first episode of The Apprentice where they have to awkwardly come up with an inspirational team name, and there's something in me that just wants to go, why can't we just have a new women's cricket team and call it the Plodders or the Plonkers Along, that kind of thing. That would be my. I would be very loyal to any women's cricket team that wanted to name themselves something slightly less exciting and aspirational. Anyway, good luck to them. They are now going to be the Blaze, obviously attached to Trent Bridge and to Nottinghamshire. And they have this new kit, the black and orange, which is very different to the pink and purple they had before, and I must say, does bear a striking resemblance to the Vipers kit.
Well, I mean, everyone wants to play in black down there. There's a genuine thing here.
That's true.
I remember when they introduced coloured clothing in county cricket about 10 years ago now, and they initially said to the teams, what colours do you want to play in? Everyone came back going, want to play in black, and the ECB had to go, guys, I think that we need to enforce some colours here, otherwise everyone's going to be in black. I quite like the Blaze, the little logo though, because the little logo, it's a bee. And it's also a flame for the blaze, but it's also a little thumbs up as well. If you look at it, it's a little thumbs up.
Oh,
so that's nice.
Oh, I'm glad you appreciate
good
their
work on
efforts
the
with the logo.
guys.
What is interesting is that they've just gone for the blaze and they haven't gone for a regional prefix.
Yeah, all the research into kind of sports team loyalty does suggest that kind of embedding your team kind of with a name in the region is generally a good thing. Obviously, there are a few examples in football where a name doesn't have a particular regional relevance, but they're few and far between, and it's an interesting choice, but it is one that a few teams have made in this league, isn't it?
It's got the feel to me of, it's almost like an experiment, so we're going to attach ourselves to Trent Bridge, but we're not going to have a Nottinghamshire or a Trent prefix to our name. So if it all goes wrong and we decide in a couple of years actually we're going to move somewhere else, we could go and attach ourselves to Leicestershire or move back to Loughborough University if we decide that that's better. So I don't know, it just feels like it's a bit more temporary than if they'd called themselves the Trent Blaze or something, but perhaps that was felt to be too similar to the Trent Rockets, because obviously Rockets blaze. I don't know, Sid. Anyway, interesting decision, and we shall see whether that rebrand and probably kind of more to the point, that move to a different county brings them any more success in the coming season. Okay, now we have had some news this week of a very soon happening England tour to the Caribbean. Now, we knew that this was happening, but we didn't know where, we didn't know when, we didn't have locations or dates. So that's been announced this week. England are going to be playing 3 ODIs and 5 T20s in Antigua and Barbados in December, right before Christmas. So that will be a nice little holiday if anyone fancies a trip to the Caribbean in the lead up to Christmas.
Yeah, but it won't be a holiday for England, will it?
No.
I mean, it's going to be an interesting tour. So after England lost their 3 games to India, obviously these games matter because of the World Cup qualification points. Lost their 3 games to India, so they're currently at the bottom of the table with 0 points, as they say in the Eurovision Song Contest, and you go, well, that doesn't matter because there are loads of games that England will win. But these have to be some of those games that England will win. They really have to be looking to try and win all 3 ODIs. All 3 ODIs being played at the Sir Vivian Richards Stadium in Antigua, which is where we were for the T20 World Cup final in 2018. And it's got a bit of a reputation. This is something that Hypercourse has mentioned on Twitter. It's got a bit of a reputation for producing kind of rubbish games of cricket. Okay. That World Cup final wasn't a great game. The semi-finals weren't great games that were also held at the same ground. West Indies have played a few games there recently that haven't been great games. So that's going to be challenging for England. There's been low scores and it's been a bit topsy-turvy, and it's the ground itself hasn't been in great condition. Okay. So that's going to be really challenging for them, and those games really matter. So I hope they're going to be up for that, and I hope the new coach has got some plans up their sleeve. Yeah, because it has been confirmed that the new coach will be in place for that tour. From a piece on CRICKETher this week, the suggestion is that they're doing the interviews at the moment. And that we hope that there'll be an announcement about the new coach within the next 7 to 10 days. And actually, that piece was quite revealing because it basically told us who was on the shortlist. Okay, who was on the shortlist, right? Well, who's on the shortlist? Well, 2 men, both called John Lewis. So there are more people called John Lewis on the shortlist than there are women. Correct. Ashley Noffke, Australian coach who has been involved in women's cricket for quite a while. He's been coaching in the WBBL. Yeah, very well respected coach. Yeah. Jonathan Batty, who's obviously coached the Invincibles in the 100. And Gareth Breeze, who's been working with the England setup, within the England women's setup, as the wicket-keeping coach, is that right? Anyway, but they're all men. That's five names that we know of via CRICKETher, who obviously have better contacts than we do in relation to this. They're all men. And
Really exciting, some really exciting candidates in there, as you say, some really well-respected candidates. It just feels a little bit disappointing that we're at this point and none of the people who the ECB feel are like the best candidates who've applied
To be shortlisted
are women. And it's not even about going, okay, well, they need to have another woman as head coach, because I think I'm on record as saying that actually I don't think that's necessary, particularly in this day and age. They've had one female head coach, and that was really important to have Lisa Kiteley in that role to show that a woman could do that, rather than the situation we had when they appointed Robbo, where Claire Connor basically said, oh, actually, no, I don't think that a woman would have suitable experience for this role, and basically ruled out a woman doing it before they'd even done the interviews, which was just a massive, what do they call it? Shooting yourself in the foot? Anyway, that's several years ago now. We've moved on from that. So I'm fine with them appointing a man, but it's just a bit disappointing. I think it really shows that the opportunities for women to progress in that way are really limited. And actually, linking back to something you said earlier in this episode, that's why it's so important to have somebody like Charlotte Edwards who's banging the drum for Anya Shrubsole and going, look, guys, she's really good. In another setup, in another world, a few years ago, she might have been overlooked. Anya Shrubsole might have been allowed to go off into the world, leave cricket altogether, become a teacher or whatever she might have done, and just do that, and we would have lost her. We would have lost all of that talent and that tactical nous that she has.
Yeah, and that's, give it 15, 20 years, and could be Anya Shrubsole on one of those shortlists.
We should say Charlotte Edwards is not going to be the next England coach, but this week she has been admitted to the ICC Hall of Fame. Huge congratulations to Charlotte Edwards. Very, very well deserved. Obviously achieved amazing things in her career as an England player, but you do kind of feel people are going, she should have been in the ICC Hall of Fame years ago. Why hasn't it happened sooner? Well, actually, you kind of feel that her biggest contribution to women's cricket could still be ahead of her, in the sense of actually if she did become the next but one England coach and then won multiple World Cups, that could be her biggest contribution, and you can totally see her doing it.
No pressure, Lottie.
Well,
no weight of expectation here.
We believe in you, Lottie. Anyway, just thought I'd slip that in there because I think it's great to see her in the Hall of Fame. Now, and finally, this week, Sid, you've actually been watching something that isn't women's cricket this week. You've been lending your support to other women's sports, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been watching a bit of rugby. I've been watching the Women's Rugby League World Cup, which Courtney Winfield-Hill has been playing for England and has been starring for England. And I've also been watching the Women's Rugby Union World Cup, which came to a climax yesterday morning in UK time. Got up early to watch the final, and like many England fans, ultimately ended up disappointed if you didn't see the result. England had a player sent off, and I think everyone acknowledges quite fairly sent off quite early on, and it kind of made it kind of killed the game, because England were always going to really struggle to kind of keep New Zealand out for another over an hour after that happened. But yeah, it's been an interesting watch. One thing that really stood out for me watching these England games in particular was just the fitness levels are absolutely unbelievable. What England in particular have achieved. I mean, to go head to head with New Zealand, despite being down to 14 players for all that, and they could still have won the game in the last minute, is just incredible. And nothing, no judgment here, but nobody in cricket is that fit.
Okay, but it's a different game.
But yeah, to be fair, I mean, I don't think it'd be possible to be. The reason for that is that cricket is an all seasons game. So if you're a cricketer, you can't peak your fitness. You have to maintain a level of fitness all year round. Whereas the England women had this target of this tournament. They started work on fitness work, months and months ago in order to peak at this moment, and they did so. And obviously, they will decline from that peak, because it's not possible to maintain that level. But that level was just absolutely incredible. And the other thing is, 40,000 people at Eden Park, which is kind of the kind of temple of rugby, if you like, in New Zealand, which is like the country where rugby is king, rugby is god. It was like their MCG moment. Where we had that moment at the MCG where we had 80,000 people. We were there. We were fortunate enough to be there. It was a fantastic moment. But what does rugby need to do? Rugby union, I should say, need to do, Raf, to kind of build on that moment? Because in some ways, cricket kind of failed to capitalise on that, hasn't it?
Well,
a
pandemic got in the way, didn't it?
Yeah, so that's the first piece of advice, guys. If you're watching this, don't have a global pandemic.
But what we see so often, and something that is often talked about in the academic literature on this subject, is that the problem for women's sport is that it has these kind of peaks and troughs, and the peaks are always related to World Cups. So you have an amazing crowd for a World Cup final. You know, you have a sellout at Lords in 2017 for a World Cup final, and then you have a sellout or a near sellout at the MCG in 2020 for the World Cup final. But outside of that, you don't have very good crowds. It doesn't make a kind of uniform impact then. People don't go, okay, well, we've had that 86,000 and then we'll come along to every Australia international at home after that. Obviously, pandemic got in the way, etc. But normally that is what we see. And that kind of in relation to the 100, one of the great things about that is that one of the most exciting things about that is that you're getting like, you know, an average of, I can't remember what the average was in the first year, like 8,000 people at all of these matches that aren't a World Cup. It's just a domestic competition, and people are coming every week, and you're getting 18,000 at Lords for the final, and how great. Because you don't see that in women's sport, and so it's very difficult. How do you build on that?
Yeah, you really have to capitalise on the moment. I think that for me, that's the key lesson that I'd want to say to rugby here. That you have to now go all out on this. Don't think that you've won here. You know what you need to do now is this is the absolute moment to put together throw all your marketing budget for the entire year at the next 6 weeks. Get people along to those domestic games. Get people following their local teams. Get people to make sure they come to the next sets of England matches. Make the tickets as cheap as possible. Affordable, sorry. Make the tickets as affordable as possible. Get the people there now. I wouldn't normally advocate throwing all your money at something in such a short term, but if there's one time to do it, this is the time. Okay. So good luck, rugby.
So that's Sid Egan, rugby guru, speaking. And you thought that you were watching or listening to a women's cricket podcast, but there you go. We're now women's rugby as well, apparently. Anyway, thanks very much for tuning in as ever, and we will see you in a week's time. Bye for now.
Bye.